Thank you, Greg. Appreciate you as always. Those of you may remember that Greg is a recently retired worship weaver who very generously left that beach on the Riviera that he's been lying on since his retirement, and with his president, I assume, and and so anyway, Greg, thanks for tearing yourself away from your life of rest and relaxation to come back and do some worship weaver this morning. We appreciate it. We appreciate it. And Stephanie, thank you so much for being here today. And this congregation has been a longtime supporter and ally of the Blue Ridge Abortion Fund. And I know some of our members, Sharon Utz, who is here today, played an important role many, many years ago in helping get the fund off the ground. I would also add that Unitarian Universalism has a long record of supporting abortion rights and sees protecting those rights and ensuring that reproductive health care is both safe and accessible as a deeply religious issue. And I would add, as Stephanie, I think, was alluding to, not just a constitutional issue, but a justice issue. And in fact, we oftentimes have been using the language of reproductive justice in recent years rather than simply reproductive rights. And Stephanie, I've already agreed that we're going to get together and talk more about how we in this congregation can partner and collaborate with the Abortion Fund and how we can pitch in and help out besides raising money. And thank you so much for your generosity today. We should be able to get our check of all of your donations to the fund in time for the matching, I hope. I told Stephanie that we oftentimes raise $5,000 over the course of a month for an organization, so maybe that'll be 10. Woo-hoo! Hopefully, yeah. So if you still want to write a check or go online, please do. So I want to share a few thoughts with you this morning about our worship theme for this month, which is vulnerability. What does it mean to be vulnerable? How do we respond to our feelings of vulnerability? And also, how can we support and help a friend or loved one or maybe a stranger who is in a vulnerable place and perhaps afraid? Now, to feel vulnerable, I looked it up, is to be worried or afraid that you or something that you care about could be harmed or hurt in some way. That harm or loss could be physical, but of course it could be emotional as well. Our feelings of vulnerability can be especially strong, and perhaps the word is raw, after we or someone we care about has experienced harm or some kind of negative change or experience in their lives. For example, some years ago, I got pretty sick, and after I recovered, and I'm fully recovered and doing great, I know when occasionally from time to time something that might be a symptom would pop up in my life, I would start to feel that vulnerability again that I felt when I was not feeling so well. So having that sense of, wow, things are changing, or things could change in a way that maybe I don't like. I think that's what it means to be vulnerable. And if you think about Taylor in that wonderful story you watched earlier, I'm sure that they were feeling pretty sad and vulnerable after that beautiful structure, whatever it was, got knocked down by a flock of birds. And I'm guessing that even after the rabbit helped Taylor feel better and Taylor was able to rebuild it, I'm guessing they were still probably a little worried and wondering if it might at some point get knocked over again. And I'm pretty sure that my late friend and spiritual mentor, Robbie Walsh, who was a Unitarian Universalist minister, and you all have heard me talk about Robbie before, I'm guessing he felt the same way after he hit his cheek and cut his thumb on that rock. He was feeling shaky and scared and asked his friend if he could lean on him as they continued on their journey. And while Robbie made the rest of his journey, I'm guessing that he was nervous on the way down and probably worried about losing his footing the next few times that he hiked. And some of those feelings of vulnerability in the future, they actually can be helpful in some ways. Think about what Robbie and Taylor both learned. Life can change at any moment, and we can lose our footing, or something we care about can fall down or get knocked over. That knowledge and experience might teach us to be more aware of slippery rocks along an uneven path, or perhaps the need to build a stronger foundation in case a flock of, I guess those were crows, fly by. But I think that there's one thing that both Taylor and Robbie learned and experienced that is much more important than being a little more careful next time with the way you build something or the speed maybe with which you walk down a slippery path. And you see, I think both of them learned how important it is to lean on others and to ask for help, to accept help when we are feeling vulnerable and afraid. I really appreciated and identified with what Robbie said about how hard it can be to ask for help. Too often, our pride and our ability to go it alone, to pull ourselves up by those bootstraps, prevents us from simply asking for a shoulder to lean on or an ear that will listen. I know that has been true in my life. And I can't tell you how many times I have struggled in fear and anxiety or silence, worried of what others might think, that they might think that I'm weak or unable to solve my own problems. That's what's made it hard for me, as Robbie said so well, simply to follow my need to ask for help. I'm not sure why so many of us can have a hard time asking for help. But one thing that doesn't make it any easier, I think, are the values that have been centered in our culture for so many generations. Think about it. The American way is about pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, accomplishing things on our own, being tough and self-reliant, not asking for help, and hiding emotions that might suggest that we might be weak or incapable of taking care of our own problems. Is it any wonder that generation after generation in this society learned that self-interest comes first, that relying on others is a sign of weakness, and that asking for help might lead people to think that we're a failure, that we're not tough enough, we can't do it on our own. But I think there is one thing that our vulnerability, our mutual vulnerability, our shared vulnerability teaches us. No matter how hard we try to do it all ourselves and to not rely on the kindness of others, there are times in life when everyone, each and every person in this room, needs a shoulder to lean on, needs someone who will simply listen. Everyone, all of us need help. And that's a good thing. That's where grace touches our lives. That's where love comes alive. If you think about it, we're all vulnerable. We can't always pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And I believe our own vulnerability can help us to learn to embrace a very different ethic and value, one in which we center our lives in mutuality rather than self-reliance or self-interest, compassion rather than judgment, and love for our neighbor rather than rampant and runaway individualism. Let me just leave you this morning with a couple of thoughts about helping others who are feeling vulnerable and sad. And if we are looking for a role model in how to be a helper, I mean the rabbit is my ideal helper. When Taylor was distraught about the structure falling down, a lot of those animal friends offered suggestions about how they could feel better. Talk, shout, laugh, pretend nothing happened, and so on. But none of them began by simply being there and listening to what Taylor needed and wanted. Then the rabbit came along. It didn't try to fix Taylor or tell them what to do. In fact, and I think this is what's so beautiful, the rabbit didn't say a word. It was present. It listened. It understood and offered a hug when Taylor was ready. I have to say, this children's story is incredibly wise and one that I wish I had read when I was learning about pastoral care in seminary. How often when we see someone who is feeling sad or vulnerable, do we try to fix them or tell them what they need to do rather than simply listening and being present? I think that urge to fix sometimes comes from our own anxiety. What do I say? What do I do? I've got to have some kind of an idea. I've got to fill up the silent parts. I can tell you that I have made this mistake so many times, I can't even begin to count, and I'm trained to know better. But when people are broken and afraid, what they need is compassion, not advice on how to find those bootstraps. That's what it means to offer a shoulder to lean on or to provide someone with a listening ear. And that's precisely what Robbie Walsh's friend did. He sat with Robbie after he fell, then offered a shoulder for the rest of the journey. Robbie didn't mention in that beautiful meditation that his friend said, Robbie, you got to be more careful when it's wet outside. Or, Robbie, make sure you look before you walk. He was just there, offering a shoulder. Vulnerability, friends, is part of what makes us human. We know things can change and happen to us or to those we love, and that those things may cause us pain, discomfort, or even harm. But that same vulnerability, it can draw us together. We need each other. We need shoulders to lean on, ears to listen, and friends to help us along the way. Let me simply conclude this morning by saying to everyone here, everyone in this sanctuary, and all of you who are on Zoom, that if at any time in your life you are in a place where you are feeling vulnerable or broken, I want you to know you are not alone. You have this congregation, this community of love and compassion that is here to offer you that shoulder to lean on and that listening ear. We won't have all the answers or solutions. Hopefully, we won't try to fix you. But one thing I can tell you for sure, what we do have in this congregation is love. What we do have in this congregation is compassion. And what we most certainly have in this congregation is each other. Amen, and blessed be.